Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome to Lost in Adaptation, the YouTube review show dedicated to discussing the connection between films and the source material they're adapting. This is the last, for now, of a set of videos I've made chronicling the multiple generations of Wicked, from its origins in L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, to parody novel by Gregory Maguire, then to Broadway musical by Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holtzman, and finally to two-part feature film. As these other videos covered pretty much everything I can possibly say about all of the previous incarnations of the story, we can jump right into the movie. Where the film adaptation of Wicked began is a little bit up for debate philosophically speaking, as Universal Studios had started adapting the story into a screenplay all the way back in the early 2000s, but were derailed when Stephen Schwartz swooped in and convinced producer Mark Platt to team up with him to turn it into a Broadway musical instead. So, from a certain point of view, pre-production for a Wicked film actually predates its own source material. After that, plans for any other form of adaptation were shelved for a bit while the musical raked in a ton of cash, until in a 2009 interview with Clamour, Maguire mentioned having sold the adaptation rights for a completely new, non-musical TV show adaptation of his book to ABC, but then nothing happened. In 2011, the notion that Selma Hayek was going to produce a TV miniseries was floated around, but once again, nothing happened. In 2012, Platt announced that Universal Studios was back on the film train, this time as an adaptation of the musical adaptation. Then nothing happened for another 6 years or so. In 2018, Universal announced that production on Wicked was officially delayed because of some rather nebulous scheduling issues, and threw their weight behind Cats instead. Good call there, guys. So, thanks to a combination of Tom Hooper's legendary folly and a global pandemic, nothing happened for another few years. During all this, different writers and directors were coming and going. The best guess that I can discern through all of these delays and messy crew changes is that they finally got serious about making the film in 2021 when John M. Chu took over as director. And hey, in addition to writer Deanna Fox, they also brought in Winnie Holtzman, the author of the Broadway musical book. She managed to take a novel that I really didn't enjoy and turn it into a compelling story, so I have a lot of respect for her as a writer. Later that year, it was announced that Cynthia Erivo would play the lead character of Elphaba, and child actor turned pop icon turned actor again, Ariana Grande, would co-star as Glinda the Good Witch. In 2022, Chu revealed that the plan was now to make not one, but two films, so they could avoid having to cut too much of the musical story. Apparently early on, the decision was made to construct as many physical sets as possible. They wanted to film in front of IRL backgrounds instead of relying on CGI. To this end, they hired Nathan Crowley, the Oscar-nominated production designer, and let him go, honestly, a little nuts on the project. They built so much stuff. The behind-the-scenes footage is kind of wild on this one. The Munchkin Village, the spinning bookcase, the Emerald City train station, even the massive robot wizard head, they're all at least partially real. The opening scene with all the flowers isn't entirely CG either. Crowley convinced the producers to let him plant 9 million tulips for this film. 9 million tulips! I've never really thought about how many tulips would feel like too many tulips before, but now I suspect it might be 9 million. That's an unsettling amount of tulips. Crowley's level of dedication to his craft is mildly terrifying. That said, I can't deny the actually build it philosophy really paid off. This film looks fucking lit. Okay, so this is utterly irrelevant old news at this point, but there was an extremely weird drama just before the film's release involving Erivo wildly overreacting to a fan edit of the film's poster that, extensively just for funsies, aimed to make it look a bit more like the Broadway musical illustration. Then half of the internet wildly overreacted to her overreaction. For a while, at least for someone as terminally online as me, it felt like everyone was talking about this. It was a symphony of overreaction. It escalated to the point that I was a little concerned for Erivo's future, as getting a reputation for being a diva can be a career killer for a black actress. See Janet Louise Hubert for more information. I suspected her best hope was for the film to be popular enough to overshadow the silly drama. And fortunately, it was. Wicked was a big success with both general audiences and critics, racked up a respectable collection of Golden Globes and BAFTA awards, and became the first fantasy movie to win Best Film from the National Board of Review of Motion Pictures. Erivo and Grande absolutely knocked it out of the park with their performances and on-screen chemistry, perfectly capturing the characters' friendship and obvious sapphic overtones. I have some adaptation-related thoughts on some of the other casting choices, but, they still did a great job as actors. There's no weak links in the cast as far as talent goes. So, a winner as a film, but that does not necessarily mean it's true to its source material, so let's discuss what they did and didn't carry over from the stage. Just a quick heads up, I'll be making the occasional reference to the second half of the musical, which hasn't been adapted yet, but might act as a spoiler for those who have only seen the film, so keep that in mind and don't yell at me. Alright, I'm not going to stretch this out for the sake of suspense. Holtzman showed that she had the utmost respect for, well, I guess her own work by crafting one of the most accurate adaptations of a source material that I've seen in a long time. Every single scene from the musical is included. They cut nothing. Nothing! They even open with the flying monkeys in reference to them fucking around on stage before they raise the curtain. The dialogue isn't always word for word, but when there are small changes and additions, it's always building off the existing text. So the parts of the film's plot that were pretty damn identical to the musical include, but are very much not limited to, the citizens of Oz celebrating the news that the Wicked Witch of the West has met her melty end at the hands of Dorothy and a well-placed bucket of water. Glinda the Good Witch arriving via magical flying sphere to confirm the late witch Elphaba's death and grudgingly admitting that they used to be friends before giving them a little information on Elphaba's backstory, which includes her mother cheating on her Governor of Munchkinland husband with a mysterious stranger who shared an alcoholic green elixir with her before sex, which resulted in a green bastard child. Cutting to some years later when they met at school and were forced to become roommates due to a misunderstanding regarding what Galinda, as she was known as back then, was raising her hand about. Elphaba's magical outburst over her disabled younger sister Nessa Rose being taken away from her that catches the attention of the school's headmistress Madame Morrible, who insists on training her as a sorceress, the elective class that Galinda had coveted. Living together resulting in mutual, unadulterated loathing for their face, their voice, and, dare I say it, even their clothing. Their history teacher, a talking goat by the name of Dr. Dillamond, telling them the history of Oz slowly but surely turning on his people since the Great Drought and the Wizard's arrival. Prince Fiyero of Winky Country joining the school late and making a compelling argument that studying is a waste of time and everyone should just enjoy life with him at a swanky nightclub later. He and Galinda appearing to hit it off to the distress of a Munchkin boy named Bock who's infatuated with her. Galinda convincing Bock to ask Nessa Rose to the club instead as a way of diverting his attention, then tricking Elphaba into accepting a fugly hat that her grandmother had sent her as a gift. Madame Morrible surprising Galinda at the nightclub with a wand and an acceptance into her sorcery class, and the revelation that Elphaba had gone out on a limb to arrange this for her. Elphaba trying to fit in by awkwardly dancing, and a guilt-ridden Galinda joining in so that she feels more accepted. Them bonding over this, and Galinda deciding to teach Elphaba social graces so she'll be more popular. Dr. Dillamond getting dragged off by the Wizard's Gestapo and replaced with a scientist keen to experiment on a lion cub, which is so distressing Elfie uses her power to overwhelm the entire room, except for her and Fiyero, who lets slip that he's not as vapid as he pretends to be when he helps her rescue the baby, which immediately forms a stronger bond between him and Elphaba than the one he was trying to cultivate with Galinda. Picking up on this new connection, Galinda attempting to act more politically minded by changing her name to Glinda in honor of Dr. Dillamond. Elphaba's magical talents finally attracting the attention of the wizard, who invites her to come and visit him in the Emerald City, and Elphaba bringing Galinda along to lift her spirits. Both girls vibing with the Emerald City pretty hard as it's a high-energy environment and the architecture matches Elphaba's skin tone perfectly. The wizard initially giving them the standard giant puppet intimidation role, but dropping it as soon as he realizes who he's talking to and explaining that he's a sentimental man who always longed to be a father, so he wants Elphaba to join him as his magical apprentice, if she can prove her power to him by reading from the Grimoire, an ancient powerful spellbook, and give his monkey servants wings. Elphaba doing so, but immediately regretting it because the transformation seems to hurt them so much, then becoming doubly horrified when the wizard accidentally lets slip that he's been intentionally orchestrating the genocide of the talking animals. She's also horrified that Madame Morrible is a part of this, but I have to admit I have limited sympathy for her there because, well, Who puts their faith in someone whose name is a play on the word horrible? Her name wasn't Madame Trustworthy. Elphaba running off with the prized grimoire and being dubbed a wicked witch and an enemy of the people for her trouble. She and Glinda getting cornered in a room, and Elphaba enchanting a broom to serve as an escape vehicle. Glinda deciding to stay behind to do some casual collaboration with the fascists, and Elphaba showing off her powers by knocking down all the guards that came for her before flying off into the west to start a campaign of animal liberation. While theatre performances usually allow for more personal interpretations of a character or scene depending on what actor has the role, there are some essential core elements of each of the main characters, and I think the film successfully recaptures most of them. Arrivo's Elphaba is the same combination of standoffish yet vulnerable as the stage character, and the haunted expression that was somewhat confusing on the poster hits a lot harder when it's in the context of her hearing that the only person who's ever believed in her has just turned on her. Glinda is such a caricature of a person it would actually be quite hard to do her wrong, but I still think that Grande did a good job portraying the good-natured narcissism and optional definition approach to words.
It's good to see me, isn't it?
Grande was probably cast as a big-name draw, but she's also clearly very passionate about the role, and I respect that. An unfortunate side effect of this extreme accuracy to the source material is Nessa Rose has so far embodied a lot of the same ableist overtones that reflected somewhat poorly on the musical, as she's depicted as living a rather miserable and lonely life because of her disability. It makes me a little nervous for part 2, because if they continue with this loyalty to the original, this sort of thing is going to get much worse, but I'm also not sure how they would go about toning it down, as it's a pretty big part of the plot. But you never know, they might surprise me. The most common deviation from the musical isn't even really a deviation, they just expanded on a bunch of scenes and added a few extra that took place in between them. We now get a first-hand look at several things that were simply alluded to in the dialogue in the original, like Elphaba's childhood before the school, the protective way she treated her little sister, the early indicators that she had magical talent, and the bullying she suffered for the colour of her skin. This and a few other new scenes of them together that were scattered throughout the film provide a certain genuine warmth between Elphaba and her sister that the musical wasn't able to convey, as they only showed the essential scenes in which they were usually in conflict with each other. I guess they felt the need to provide a more easily quantifiable motivation for Elphaba to care about the talking animals of Oz, besides just having empathy for all sapient beings. So they added a bear nanny that did most of the raising of her while her parents were busy being neglectful. I hope, just for the sake of it not being a massive bummer, that they don't feel the need to kill this berry sitter off in the sequel, or subject her to the same fate as Dr. Dillamond. Speaking of Dr. D, originally his position as a high-profile animal rights activist was mostly implied, but the film takes the time to show us that he's conducting secret meetings with other animals and attempting to prepare them for the upcoming resistance movement. The film also depicts Madame Marble's sorcery lessons with Elphaba, further establishing her natural talents and the growing connection between these two characters. There's a massive plot dump added to the middle of the song One Short Day. This new plethora of backstory is delivered in musical form by Idina Menzel and Christian Chenoweth, the original Broadway actors for Elphaba and Glinda, as they made their inevitable but fun cameo appearances. It's surprising that this is the closest the film gets to an original song, as they announced there would be at least two. One has to assume they'll either be in part 2 or were cut because of the already extensive runtime. Anyways, this new segment provides a backstory for the Grimoire and how it led to everyone's instant fanatical love for the wizard as soon as he arrived in Oz. For the former, the musical simply trusted that the audience could understand that it was an important, unique spellbook from context clues, and relied on familiarity with the source material to not question the latter. But now it's all tied into the pseudo-religious history of the country, and a prophecy that the wizard faked being a part of by pretending to be able to read from the book. BT dubs, the film's depiction of the Grimoire succeeded in impressing me. I didn't realize you could make a book look unique while still being relatively practical, but they found a way. In the film, apparently Shiz is right on the border of the great impassable desert that surrounds Oz, which doesn't match the original map, but does mean we get a look at it, and it looks pretty sick. Transport to and from Shiz wasn't really explored in the stage version for obvious reasons, but the film had a lot more backgrounds and establishing shots to work with. Following the logic that the more modern forms of transport, like balloons and trains, were invented by the relatively new wizard, but not wanting to have everyone just rock up on carriages, they decided to make boating along canals and rivers the most common means of getting there, and built a really nice set to incorporate the dock into the school's courtyard. So apparently they teach martial arts at Shiz now. Actually, yeah, that fucking slaps. Get it, girl. One thing that I never would have guessed in advance is that Film, Bock, and Fierro would have more interactions, and that I would pick up on some interesting chemistry between them. That said, I suspect Jonathan Bailey could project chemistry with a lamp if he so desired, so I guess it's not that surprising. The still silver enough to avoid getting sued slippers are given even more gravitas by the film by making them the former prized possession of the sister's late mother. In the film, Elphaba was apparently not intending to attend Shiz until Madame Marble witnessed her power and talked her into it. This actually helps explain a few things, like why she and her younger sister started at the same time, and why they didn't have a room ready for her, leading to the fateful bunking with Galinda. Phil Morrible also took credit for Elphaba's first big outburst of magic. It appears in order to save her and Nessa Rose from becoming weirdo social outcasts on their first day, which is nice, but I mean, that's what happened in the musical. That scene was there for a reason. Elphaba was unpopular from the start, not just because she was green, but because she scared the crap out of people, and we hate what we fear. I enjoyed the subtle world building they added here and there, like the early revelation that the wizard had intentionally erased animals' involvement in the founding of Shiz. Galinda's gay entourage are given bigger roles, sassing their way into several new scenes. As an entertainment medium, a stage performance tends to be granted a lot more suspension of disbelief because of the limitations of live shows and you never seeing the cast up close. So while it's not entirely fair, I still have to point out that in the film it is suddenly a lot more noticeable and weird that there's a school populated almost exclusively by students in their mid to late 30s. Some of these people in school uniforms are old enough to have kids who would be ready to start school. Dr. Dillamond comes full circle back to being a regularly shaped quadrupedal goat. No longer restricted by the shape of human actors, the film skips back an adaptation generation or two and restores the entirely not anthropomorphic animal to his full glory. They even put some thought into a goat-accessible tea set, which I enjoyed. Exactly how this scene is handled seems to differ between performances of the musical, but in general it seems that the two-legged Dr. Dillamond's mispronunciation of Galinda as Glinda was due to him not giving enough of a shit about her to learn her name. However, the film really plays up the idea that he has trouble with the word because he's a goat and ends up bleating it. Linda. This is a little weird because he says several other words with an ass syllable at the start with no issue, and because him bleating the word bad later on was supposed to be a super ominous and chilling indicator that the country's depersonifying of animals has already started to affect him despite his awareness of it. It kind of cheapens that moment if it's a known speech impediment. Fierro's servant is replaced with a talking horse, which is actually an extremely logical choice when you consider the primary role of this brief character was as a form of transport. Fierro's intro is subtly different. He's actively riding instead of being wheeled around unconscious and hungover, and he's a lot more polite to Elphaba on their first meeting. Original Fierro didn't give any indication he was into the green gal until the lion cub incident. Bock, entirely surnameless in the musical, now introduces himself as Bock Woodsman, foreshadowing his dark fate in part 2. Personally, I would have been more impressed if they'd called him Bock Chopper in reference to the original name of the Tin Woodsman in L. Frank Baum's novels, but you can't have everything. The film introduces a tiny plot hole by having Bock claim that students aren't allowed to leave the campus after dark, but then no one, including Madame Morrible herself, reacting when the school's head mistress turns up at the club they're supposedly not supposed to be at. The spell that Elphaba instinctively casts to save the lion cub is another thing that sometimes changes between performances. A lot of the time she just forces the entire room to start dancing, but in the version I saw, they also got wires involved and had a few of them floating towards the ceiling in contorted positions. The film abandons this altogether in favor of referencing the Sleepy Time Poppy Field scene in the original story. Less dramatic overall, but it's a solid and easily recognizable tie-in. As I hinted at earlier, some changes came around solely from the casting choices. Choosing a black woman to portray Elphaba makes the green skin hate being allegorical for racism less allegorical, but hey, there's no rule saying it has to be subtle. Let's face it, any character that Jeff Goldblum has ever portrayed has been Jeff Goldblum first and anything else second. He always goes full Goldbluming.
Goldbluming? I don't know what that means.
This is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a consistent thing. So it's safe to say that they knew that they were throwing away all of what was accepted to be the wizard's original mannerisms when they hired him. While Michelle Yeoh has proven that she's perfectly capable of portraying silly characters in other films, she still ends up bringing an element of dignity and competence to the character of Madame Morrible that doesn't really gel with the awkward, constantly making up non-words musical original. However, this was accounted for as they created an entirely new character called Miss Coddle, who's more physically reminiscent of the musical version of Morrible, and then reassigned most of her more bumbling and casually villainous actions to her. I think this had the happy side effect of strengthening the connection between Morrible and Elphaba, and made the big betrayal moment more effective than ever. But, and do keep in mind that I don't know very much about this, but Yeoh does not appear to possess a musical theatre level singing voice in this film, which made the casting decision a little more questionable.
If you work as you should, you'll be making good.
One of the very few omissions from the film was Bok's outburst at the train station when Glinda called him Bick one too many times and he stormed off. Now, on first viewing, I took this to mean that he developed real feels for Nessa Rose and lost interest in Glinda, but when they return after the intermission, he's back on the Glinda simp bus. Of course, Nessa Rose becoming a tyrannical dictator might have been a factor there, but I can see why they might have wanted to skip this potential confusion. Another rare omission was the Emerald City green tinted glasses that I was so amused to see in the musical. Again, you can't have everything you want. The film's climax, as Elphaba flees the wizard's throne room with the Grimoire and fully unlocks her magical powers, is several magnitudes more dramatic than the musical. Elphaba and Glinda are now chased all over the palace by the guards and the newly created flying monkeys, and attempt to use the wizard's hot air balloon to escape, destroying it in the process. I thought he was supposed to leave the country in that at the end of the story, but I guess they could build him a new one. There's also a surprisingly long sequence of Elphaba falling down the side of the building that kind of reminded me of Tony Stark in the first Avengers movie. It's a cool scene, don't get me wrong. Her reaching out to her child self in an act of self-love and support that she's finally given up trying to get from exterior sources, and receiving her broom and her personal power back as a result was really well done, and dare I say it, even somewhat moving, but it breaks up her singing Defying Gravity so much, the big climax of the song might as well have been a completely separate musical number. In fact, quite a lot of the film's version of these songs contains surprisingly long breaks for additional acting moments. It reaches the point that in some cases, I don't think the experience of watching the film would give you an accurate idea of what these songs sounded like in the musical. Amusingly, it appears I was not the only person who noticed that their attempt to splice the broken up parts of Arrivo's Defying Gravity back together in the film's official soundtrack resulted in a very awkward transition.
I'm the one you want! I'm the one you want! It's me!
It's me!
Final thoughts. So, like I said, they cut nothing, and they changed very little in the grand scheme of things, certainly nothing of huge importance. This is a loving tribute to the musical that successfully recreates most of its positive selling points. The themes of prejudice, power, and propaganda are all there, the touching story of friendship and self-empowerment translated well, and the warning about the danger of apathy in the face of fascist assholes engaging in social oppression and scapegoating remains strong, which is good, because deeply depressingly, it's even more relevant now than it was back in the Bush era when it was conceived. It couldn't happen here in Oz, indeed. But this achievement as an adaptation might also be its biggest hindrance as a film, because it's a really long film. I'm sorry, I know some people will disagree with me here, but as far as I'm concerned, 2 hours and 41 minutes is pushing your luck for keeping my Anglo arse in a theatre seat. I have other shit to do today. That's the same length as the entire Broadway musical, including the intermission. It's not a deal breaker, and I for sure can't say that going a different route wouldn't have been worse, but I'm just saying that expanding on so many elements of it while cutting nothing to make room for it leaves it somewhat bloated. It's a common pitfall of the original writer working on the adaptation, the inability or unwillingness to recognize what's not essential. But I don't want to be too negative. If you liked the musical, you'll really enjoy this, and if the film has piqued your interest in the musical and it's playing near you, definitely go and see it. You will have a good time. But if the theatre is not an option right now, fear not. There's still a ton of extra Wicked-related content you can enjoy from the comfort of your own home, like my real-time reaction to reading the very strange original book by Gregory Maguire, going to see the musical, and my deep dive into the increasingly unhinged Wizard of Oz sequel novels that L. Frank Baum wrote. If you've understandably had your fill of Wicked, there's still plenty of other bonus Dom videos to enjoy. The 2-hour-long number of me going slowly insane because I tried to marathon all of the Bridgerton novels, for example. And if you're looking to try something brand new, you might enjoy Abolish Everything. It's a fun show with a unique concept. 4 comedians compete to make the most convincing argument for the erasure of their personal pet peeve from existence, then defend their case from cross-examination by a panel of judges. All this and more is available on Nebula. Nebula is a prestige streaming service that was founded by creators to allow them to take their work to the next level. It hosts a ton of original content you can't see anywhere else, including bonus, uncensored, and extended versions of videos by creators like H-Bomber Guy, Philosophy Tube, Lindsay Ellis, Todd in the Shadows, Jetlag, Princess Weeks, and Riff Tracks. Because Nebula is a subscription service, there's no ad breaks or sponsorships interrupting your entertainment, which is how it's supposed to work. That's how it's supposed to work, Amazon! With my link, nebula.tv/Dominic Noble, available in QR form and a handy clickable format in the video description, you can get access to the entirety of Nebula for just $6 a month, or, if an annual subscription appeals, you can get it discounted all the way down to a mere $36, which is the equivalent of $3 a month. You can even get a lifetime subscription to Nebula now. For $300, you can gain eternal access. For as long as the site exists and you draw breath, you'll be entitled to all it has to offer. It's a great way to stay entertained and support creators like me.